Data strategy. Why did organizations come to us needing sort of strategic help? Here we've got problem and then the actual source of the problem, which didn't always align, which I found quite interesting. So about a third of people came to us because they weren't seeing value from data initiatives. And what we found in about 60% of those cases was that the initiatives that they were carrying out were just not aligned to business ROI. It tended to be that it was aligned to who was shouting the loudest internally as a business, or what was perceived as to be a hot issue that particular day, month, or year, or a lot of ad hoc work was being done. End users were just not using the data tool. Was a case in about a quarter of the strategic problems, and a lot of the time it was that the wrong tools were in place, typically tools that were too complicated for business users to get their heads around, or that there was underlying inaccurate data, which meant that the business users did not trust the tools that they were seeing. They tended to blame the tools, which wasn't always accurate, but data trust was lost, and then people didn't use the tool at all. Companies had a really long data wish list in place, and the underlying problem was just everyone wanted to do everything at once. Everything was a priority, and in those scenarios, nothing was a priority. And then a messy and costly data stack was in place. So a real lack of data governance and processes in place, which meant that maintenance costs rose really quickly. It meant that a lot of initiatives weren't taking place that were more impactful because people were too busy sort of firefighting. So we saw alignment with business was the top problem in terms of strategy, and looking at industry stats. So about a quarter of people, 23.9%, only 23.9% had created a data-driven organization. So 75% of people in a survey of top 100 enterprise level had not done that. That number has actually gone down over the last 4 years. So when they did it 4 years ago, it was higher, and now less people are saying that they've got a data-driven organization. Maybe because of AI, they understand that there's a bigger gap there than they did before. And 71% of chief data officers struggle to influence the C-suite. And if your data is not influencing the decisions, it's not going to have an impact. So the key problems were lack of governance, documentation, and processes, or key contributors to messy infrastructure. Ad hoc data pulls and constantly firefighting new business requests without a clear process meant that data people aren't adding value to the bottom line. And every data initiative comes with time and resources in terms of ongoing maintenance costs, which is difficult to quantify and plan for. Once again, I'll bring in Candice at this point.
Thank you, Oliver. We'd love to hear Yannick and Tom your thoughts here. But 100%, if you don't align, I think the key thing is aligning business goals and data initiatives. Otherwise, you're constantly building things but not returning value, and then you get into a vicious cycle. You still have to firefight with ad hoc requests that you didn't think of initially.
I think our friends in IT have got this sort of quite well defined, in that if you have an IT request, that there's normally a form you have to fill in, there's a process behind that before they work on that. Should data teams consider that, or does that make them potentially quite transactional?
I guess the question leading up to that is how many of those requests can be self-serviced? Typically, if you're not taking care of 90% of typical business questions in an automated way, you should start there. Then how does requests come to the data team? It doesn't really matter at the end of the day, as long as those requests are meaningful, not repeated. So if you're doing the same things twice, we used to have a saying, you need to automate it because you're guaranteed to do it again, or someone else will need to do it again. And then how requests are raised, either it's Jira, either it's a ticketing system, that's all fine. That doesn't, it isn't a problem.
Cool. So our recommendations at the strategic level: ensure that you have clear business objectives and KPIs before trying to match with data. I do feel like sometimes we speak to companies that haven't quite got that aligned, and then we'll model the data and then they'll change later, which just adds cost to that. From a technology point of view, self-hosting and custom elements add quite a big burden on your analytics teams in the long run. They seem to be free, which is why a lot of people do them, but actually at scale, it's an added cost, which is why, you know, we used to build a lot of custom Python extractors for people, and then we switched to telling people, hey, actually maybe use Fivetran as the first point of call and then build something if that's not available there. And people-wise, be sure to involve your end users when selecting BI tools, dashboards and that kind of thing, and consider what outputs are needed. There is obviously the most important thing. I'm just going to bring you back in here, Candice, because we've got a great quote here from Max at Newman. He said that ultimately data products need to be aligned with the business, but it's not always easy to demonstrate ROI, particularly from foundational work, which is often needed to bring alive more complex projects later. That's a problem we have a lot of time, where we say, hey, you need to spend months to build this infrastructure to get the basics in place before you can do the sexy stuff that you really want. That's always a hard message to give to people. What's your advice of that?
What we've learned, I guess, in the 5 years is where can we bring value within that process. So as we build a foundation, we always want to make sure we build towards a business use case. So that could be automating the leadership dashboard, automating investor reports, or, you know, as soon as end user can see something to demonstrate the data value, the better. So always think about where is the lowest hanging fruit with the biggest impact and build towards that quickly. And while you're building that, set up the underlying pipeline. So do the work, spend the time, but make sure there's something tangible at the end of it.